Stop! The word burst from William Carter's throat like thunder, shattering the fragile illusion of harmony that had cloaked the mansion for months. The tall millionaire froze in the doorway of the kitchen, his breath caught in his chest at the sight before him. On the cold tiled floor, his 7-year-old daughter Clara knelt in a puddle of spilled milk, her thin arms wrapped tightly around baby Samuel, whose cries rasped in broken sobs. Across from them stood Isabella, her red dress clinging to her figure, a glass pitcher still dripping with white streaks from the act she had just committed. Clara's trembling voice slipped out like a plea torn from the heart of a child. "I'm sorry, I only wanted my brother to have a full stomach." For a moment, the room went silent except for the baby's hoarse wailing and the slow drip of milk sliding down Clara's hair. The grandeur of the Carter household, with its polished marble counters and gleaming chandeliers, suddenly felt like a prison chamber where innocence had been trampled under the heel of cruelty. If this story grips your heart, please take a moment to leave a comment below and share your thoughts, because your voice matters to the children like Clara who long for someone to hear them. William's eyes blazed as his voice roared again, deep and cutting. "Isabella, put that pitcher down right now. Who gave you the right to pour milk on my child's head?" For the first time since he married her, his tone cracked the surface of her perfect composure. Isabella flinched, her eyes flashing with something between fear and rage, then quickly melted her expression back into a mask of sweetness. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing against William's sleeve as if to weave a spell, her voice low and dripping with practiced gentleness. "My love, I was only teaching her a lesson. She took what did not belong to her. That milk was for my skin care, not for the baby. I am guiding her so she won't grow up spoiled." William's fury faltered, clouded by confusion, yet his gaze returned to Clara. The little girl's cheeks were streaked with milk and tears, her wide eyes silently begging for him to believe her. She clutched Samuel as though she could shield him from the world with nothing more than her small, trembling frame. William handed her a towel with stiff hands, his voice lowering but still edged with steel. "Clara, you must not take without permission. Next time, tell me." Clara bit her lip, whispered again, "I'm sorry, I only wanted—" Her words faded, swallowed by Samuel's weak sobs. Isabella's hand lingered on William's arm, her eyes glistening with false hurt as she whispered, "See, she knows she was wrong. We must stand united, my love, or they will never respect us." William exhaled sharply, his chest tightening with a pressure he could not name, torn between the fragile plea of his daughter and the honeyed poison of his wife's tone. At that moment, Clara's lips brushed Samuel's ear as she whispered, so softly only he could hear, "We just have to endure." The mansion on Brooklyn Heights stood tall against the twilight sky, yet inside its gilded walls, the air felt heavy with silence, a silence that clung to William Carter like a second skin. Once upon a time, he had returned home to laughter, to Eleanor's gentle voice humming as she rocked their newborn son, to little Clara's eager footsteps racing across the hall to greet him, her soft brown curls bouncing as she leapt into her father's arms. But all of that had vanished less than a year ago when Eleanor, his beloved wife of 10 years, lost her life to postpartum complications. Her absence left a void no wealth could ever fill, a silence no chandelier nor grand piano could disguise. In her final days, Eleanor had recorded a message, her tired but loving eyes fixed on the camera as she whispered, "Take care of Clara and Samuel, William. Do not let the light in her eyes fade, for she will speak through them when she has no words left." Those words had haunted him ever since, a ghostly refrain that pressed into his chest whenever he dared to look at his daughter. To escape his grief, William buried himself in work, sealing deals in glass towers, surrounding himself with numbers and contracts, convincing himself that building empires would ease the loneliness echoing through his home. It was during this fragile time that Isabella Moore entered his life, a woman of striking beauty with a voice as smooth as honey and a charm that soothed his aching pride. Friends applauded his choice. Newspapers described them as a golden couple. But beneath the surface, Clara's world began to change. At 7 years old, Clara Carter was already carrying more weight than her tiny shoulders could bear. With her thin frame and solemn eyes, she moved quietly around the house, clutching baby Samuel close to her chest, as though she were both sister and mother. Her yellow dress from last year's birthday party still hung loosely on her, frayed at the edges, a silent testimony to how little she had grown. She missed Eleanor's warmth, but held on to scraps of memory. Her mother's lullabies, the way she kissed her forehead goodnight, the promise that she would always be safe. Clara had tried to believe it, even as Isabella's voice grew sharper, even as meals grew smaller, even as her father's presence became distant like a figure glimpsed through fog. Samuel, barely 10 months old, was the fragile center of her world. His cries tore through the stillness of the house each night, and Clara's small hands did their best to soothe him, to rock him, to hush him, even when her own stomach twisted with hunger. At school, Clara became quieter, sitting in the farthest corner of Grace Miller's classroom. Grace, a compassionate teacher with keen eyes, noticed the way the girl's sleeves always seemed to cover her wrists, the way her hand darted quickly when food was left unattended, the way her eyes lit up only when Samuel's name was mentioned. Grace began to slip her extra milk cartons into Clara's backpack, whispering, "Take this for him." And though Clara only murmured a shy thank you, the gratitude in her eyes spoke volumes. Across the hall in the apartment building, an elderly neighbor named Margaret Brown also became part of Clara's secret lifeline. Many evenings, Clara would knock gently at her door, voice barely above a whisper, "Do you have leftover bread? My brother is hungry." Margaret, with her flour-dusted hands and tired eyes, would always sigh and hand her a bag of muffins or warm rolls, saying firmly, "Share it fairly, child. He eats first." Yet despite these small kindnesses, Clara carried the constant weight of fear. In her mind, Eleanor's last words played over and over, a reminder and a plea she was too young to fully grasp. And William, her father, remained blind, convinced that order in the household meant unity, that Isabella's sweet voice masked sincerity, that his children were simply adjusting to change. Each night, Clara whispered into Samuel's ear as she held him tightly, "We just have to endure." But the light in her eyes was fading, and one evening, as William walked past the half-closed nursery door, he caught that whisper for the first time. The days that followed stretched like a cruel thread for little Clara, each one marked by hunger, fear, and a desperate attempt to shield her brother from the storm that lingered behind every door. At school, she pressed herself against the wall near the cafeteria, her stomach twisting as she eyed a half-eaten sandwich left behind by a careless classmate. Her small hand trembled as she reached for it, only to be caught by the surprised gaze of the child who owned it. Clara flushed crimson, clutching it to her chest, whispering with a voice so faint it was nearly lost in the cafeteria's noise, "I'm sorry, my baby brother is so hungry. I just wanted to take it home for him." Before the child could answer, Grace Miller appeared, her steady voice wrapping around Clara like a gentle shield. "Let me take a look." Grace placed a carton of milk and a packet of cookies into Clara's hands, lowering her voice so no one else would hear. "Drink this and finish your lunch. I'll make sure your classmate gets another. And if you need more food for your brother, just come to me." Clara nodded quickly, her eyes wet with gratitude, clutching the milk as though it were treasure. Later that evening, she darted across the hall to knock on Margaret Brown's door, her shoes scuffing softly against the carpet. The elderly woman opened the door with flour still on her fingers and glasses sliding down her nose. "It's you again," she sighed, handing over a bag of muffins. "Give Samuel his share first, then eat." Clara bowed deeply, whispering "thank you" before running back. That same night, as William stepped into the lobby of the building, Margaret stopped him with a sharp look. "Your little girl is far too thin, Mr. Carter. She came to me asking for bread." William stiffened, his grip on the phone tightening as he muttered, "You must be mistaken." Margaret's frown was unwavering. "I know what hunger looks like. Don't blind yourself." Her words dug into him, but he brushed them aside, convincing himself Clara was only greedy. Yet doubt gnawed at him. That doubt flared one night when William opened the back door for fresh air and found Clara crouched on the cold steps, shielding Samuel in an old stroller. She clutched a flimsy plastic bag with leftover bread, her eyes widening with terror as she whispered, "Dad, please, Jacob is so hungry." For a moment, William froze, the truth striking like a blade. But Isabella's voice from the hallway cut through his hesitation. Later that night, Isabella leaned close to Clara's ear, her smile frozen in place while her words hissed like wire. "If you open your mouth tomorrow, your brother will never taste milk again." Clara shivered, swallowing her fear, while William retreated upstairs to his study, guilt clawing at him. He sat before his laptop, opening an old folder he had avoided for months. The screen flickered to life with Eleanor's tired but loving face. Her recorded voice echoed into the silence. "Do not let the light in her eyes fade." At that very moment, a chime rang from his inbox, an anonymous email flashing across the screen with only one line. "If you are still a father, open your eyes." William's pulse quickened, his hand gripping the desk as he stared at the words, the echo of his wife's plea colliding with the truth he had just witnessed. And for the first time in months, he no longer knew where to hide. The night pressed down heavy on the Carter household, yet William's mind refused to rest. He returned to the children's room under the pretense of looking for school papers. But what he discovered was far heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Inside Clara's desk, tucked beneath a frayed sweater, lay a small blue notebook, its corners taped and pages smudged with childish ink. He opened it carefully, and what he read froze him in place. Shaky handwriting that spoke louder than any scream. "My brother cried because he was hungry. She made me kneel for asking more milk. If I speak, Samuel will starve." William's chest constricted, his breath turning shallow as he flipped through page after page, filled with notes of fear and hunger. Receipts from corner stores, milk schedules scribbled in tiny letters, and a sticky note reading, "Miss Grace said I could bring one carton home. Don't let her know. She'll be mad." Tears welled but refused to fall as Eleanor's recorded voice echoed once more in his memory, "Don't let the light in her eyes fade." The next morning, he called Daniel Singh, a trusted security technician, and within hours, tiny cameras no larger than buttons were hidden across the kitchen and living room. William's heart pounded with every click as the devices came to life, capturing the truth he had refused to see. By midday, the footage revealed Isabella's mask slipping away completely. She slapped Clara across the cheek for dropping a spoon, her voice hissing venom as Samuel wailed in the background. She diluted bottles of milk with water, setting them out of reach while laughing into her phone about spa appointments. Later, William watched her retrieve envelopes of money he had given for the children's needs and slip them into her purse. The evidence was undeniable, a blade cutting straight through the fog of his doubts. That evening, he summoned Edward Hughes, the old family lawyer who had once stood beside Eleanor during happier days. They sat in silence before the monitor as the footage played, the slap echoing like a whip, Isabella's voice hissing threats of boarding school for Clara. Edward's jaw tightened as he muttered, "This isn't discipline. This is abuse mixed with fraud. We must prepare for property appropriation as well." William's world spun, yet a clarity began to take shape. He picked up the phone and dialed Detective Michael Turner, a man known for handling delicate child cases with calm authority. "Don't confront her yet," Turner advised. "Keep recording, build the case. I'll prepare a team." For the first time in years, William felt less like a businessman and more like a father standing on the edge of a battlefield. My dear listeners, if you were in William's shoes, torn between the sweet lies of a spouse and the silent cries of your child, what would you do? Would you confront immediately or gather proof in silence? Please leave your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective may guide another parent trapped in the shadows. The following evening, Isabella returned home in an elegant silk gown, her smile radiant as she ladled soup onto William's plate, speaking as though nothing were amiss. "I've been looking into excellent boarding schools," she announced. "Clara needs structure and discipline, and it's best to start early. She'll thank us one day." William swallowed back his rage, masking it behind the same stone expression he used in boardrooms, and asked casually, "Which schools? How much are the tuition fees?" Isabella smiled, sensing victory, her eyes glinting like a predator closing in. The tension simmered like a storm beneath the polished surface of their dining table. Later that week, Isabella arrived not alone, but with Philip Grant, a slick attorney carrying a briefcase of neatly stacked papers. "These are only temporary management forms," he explained with practiced ease. "Sign here and here, Mr. Carter. It will simplify ownership and reduce risks." Isabella leaned close, her whisper slicing through William's ear like a blade. Just sign it, darling. I'm tired of handling everything myself. But William's eyes drifted toward the hallway, where one of Daniel's hidden cameras blinked silently, capturing every move. His hand hovered above the pen, heart pounding as though Eleanor herself were standing behind him. And in that heavy silence, he knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. The dining room glittered with polished silverware and crystal glasses, but beneath the shine lurked a tension so thick it seemed to choke the air itself. Isabella sat tall, her red lips curving into a smile that did not reach her eyes, while Philip Grant arranged the stack of legal documents neatly on the table, his smooth voice flowing like oil. Just signatures, Mr. Carter. Here and here. This will keep everything orderly. Clara sat stiffly at the far end, clutching Samuel in her arms, her small body tense as though she sensed the battle raging silently around her. William leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable, but inside his chest a storm was breaking loose. Isabella reached across the table, her fingers brushing against the pen, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. William, darling, don't delay. You've always trusted me to manage the details. Let's make life easier. At that moment, William rose, each step deliberate, and crossed to the mantel where a small remote lay beside Eleanor's framed photo. He picked it up, his gaze never leaving Isabella's. A single click and the wall-mounted screen lit up. The room filled with sharp sounds that no one could deny. The slap of Isabella's hand striking Clara's face, Samuel's hoarse cries, the cruel hiss of her threats about boarding school and starvation. Isabella shot to her feet, her face draining of color before flushing with fury. You set me up. This is staged. This is edited, she shrieked, lunging toward the table to snatch the papers away. Philip's composure faltered, his practiced calm breaking as he glanced at the damning images flashing across the screen. William's voice cut through the chaos, low and cold. No more lies. I've seen enough. Clara clutched Samuel tighter, pressing his head against her chest, as if to shield him from the venom in Isabella's voice. Isabella spun on her heel, her hair whipping as she hissed, This fortune should have been mine. Do you think I married you for love? Everything you own should have belonged to me. Her words slashed through the air like knives, the mask of charm torn away to reveal the raw greed beneath. The door opened suddenly and Detective Michael Turner entered, his presence steady, his tone calm, yet firm. Two officers followed behind, their steps echoing across the wooden floor. Isabella Moore, you are under investigation for child abuse and financial fraud. Philip Grant, Robert Klein, you will be questioned for conspiracy and embezzlement. Isabella screamed, clawing at the papers, but one officer pinned her arms while another cuffed Philip, who sputtered weak protests about legality and misunderstanding. Robert Klein, the accountant, entered moments later carrying a leather briefcase, only to freeze as Turner's officers intercepted him, reading his rights on the spot. The glamorous dining room had become a courtroom of truth, every polished surface reflecting the stark collapse of deception. Isabella's eyes burned with venom as she twisted her head toward Clara, spitting words like acid. You ruined everything! If not for you, none of this would have fallen apart. Clara's body trembled, but her arms did not loosen from Samuel, her wide eyes fixed on her father, as if begging him not to turn away this time. William stepped forward, his voice steady. Leave her out of this. You wanted wealth, but you forgot these children are my life. For the first time in months, he spoke as both father and protector, and the walls of the house seemed to release the breath they had been holding. Isabella struggled against the officer's grip, her screams shrill. Without me, you are nothing. But William's gaze was ice, no longer clouded, no longer weak. As the police began to escort her toward the door, the neighbors' curious murmurs filled the hallway, the community witnessing the downfall of a woman who had once walked among them with polished grace. But Clara barely noticed. Her small hands tightened on Samuel, as though her world could still shatter if her father faltered again. William reached toward his daughter, but she did not move, her whispered words breaking the silence like a fragile thread. Dad, if you really still love us, look at Samuel. His eyes will tell you everything. The echo of Isabella's screams faded down the hallway as the police led her away, but the scars of her cruelty lingered in the silence that followed. William stood rooted in place, the weight of his daughter's whispered plea pressing heavier on his chest than any business empire he had ever carried. That night, the mansion no longer felt like his. It felt like Clara's battlefield, and he could not look away. He lifted Samuel from her arms, startled by the baby's fragile weight, and whispered a vow into his soft hair, "Never again, my son." The following days were awkward and halting as William stumbled into a fatherhood he had once avoided. He rose in the night when Samuel cried, fumbling clumsily with bottles, burning his fingers on water too hot, adding too much formula, then starting over as Clara stood silently by the crib, ready to correct him with a timid finger pointing to the proper line on the bottle. The man who once signed million-dollar deals without hesitation now measured spoonfuls of powdered milk with trembling hands, each small success loosening the knot in his daughter's guarded gaze. Yet healing was not simple. Clara often hovered by the door, unsure whether to trust, her eyes flickering with suspicion each time William reached for Samuel, as though she still feared he might vanish into the fog of work and neglect. One night Samuel spiked a fever, his tiny body burning with heat, his breath ragged. Panic crashed over William like a tidal wave. He clutched the boy to his chest, shouting hoarsely, "Get my coat, Clara!" Together they rushed into the night air, Clara's small hands dragging a jacket from the closet as she struggled to keep pace. At the hospital, the bright white lights stabbed William's weary eyes as Nurse Kelly swiftly placed Samuel on the examination table, and Dr. Thomas Blake leaned over with calm precision, soothing the baby's cries as he lowered the fever. "A viral infection," the doctor explained gently. "Keep him hydrated, watch his breathing, and if anything worsens, bring him back immediately." William nodded again and again, his grip never loosening, whispering over and over, "Don't leave me, Samuel, please don't leave me." Clara sat beside him, her small body trembling with fear, and for the first time she rested her head against his shoulder, too exhausted to resist. When the fever finally broke, William let out a sob he had not known he was holding, clutching both children close as though anchoring himself in a storm. Returning home near dawn, Clara quietly boiled water and prepared ginger tea for her father, her hands still shaky. "Drink this, Daddy," she whispered, and William accepted it with a faint smile, the word Daddy cutting through him like both a wound and a balm. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang, and Grace Miller arrived with a bag of milk cartons and children's books, her steady eyes meeting William's as she said, "She doesn't need promises. She needs proof that you stay." Behind her came Margaret Brown carrying chicken soup, and later Helen Davis from the diner, her arms full of fresh bread. One by one, the community wove itself into the Carter household, each gesture a stitch mending the torn fabric of trust. Slowly, Clara began to open, writing in a new red notebook with a careful hand. Today, Daddy carried Samuel. Today, Daddy made milk himself. Today, Daddy stayed home. William stumbled upon it one evening, his heart swelling with both shame and pride, realizing her diary was no longer filled with fear, but with seeds of hope. Nights grew warmer in the mansion as laughter began to creep back into its corners. Yet shadows still lingered. Whenever William turned away too quickly, Clara's shoulders stiffened, as if bracing for abandonment. He knew the road to healing would not be won in a single battle, but in the countless small acts of staying. And so, as winter's first snow fell, William stood at the window holding Samuel close while Clara leaned against his side, and he whispered to the night, "Eleanor, I'm keeping my promise." But just as peace seemed to take root, Edward Hughes arrived at the door with papers in hand, his expression grave, warning, "William, Isabella is fighting back in court. The trial will be brutal, and she has powerful allies." Snow blanketed the streets of Brooklyn Heights as the Carter home glowed with a warmth it had not known in years, the shadows of Isabella's cruelty fading behind the heavy doors of justice, where she now faced a prison sentence for abuse and fraud. William stood among neighbors and friends in the newly opened Hope Haven Center, a modest building born not of wealth but of conviction, its walls filled with storybooks, small chairs, and the sound of children's laughter. Grace read aloud to a circle of little ones. Margaret served soup with steady hands. Helen arranged trays of bread and cocoa, and volunteers Ethan and Sophie painted stars on the walls as Clara carefully wrote the words, "Family is where no one is left behind," on a wooden plaque to hang above the entrance. Samuel, stronger now, tottered across the floor on wobbly legs, his first steps carrying him into his father's arms, and then with a bright clarity that silenced the room, he called out for the first time, "Dad!" William's eyes filled with tears as he held his son high, his other arm reaching for Clara, who pressed against his chest, her eyes no longer clouded with fear, but shining with the light Eleanor had begged him never to let fade. Around them, the Christmas tree sparkled, voices rose in song, and for the first time in too long, the mansion of William Carter was not a cage, but a home. He lowered his gaze to his children and whispered, "We have lost too much, but from now on there will only be light." That night, as the snow fell softly outside, Clara opened her red notebook and wrote a single line before closing it with care. "Daddy stayed." To those listening now, remember this. Sometimes the light arrives late, but it always comes to those who refuse to let kindness die. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below, subscribe, and share it with someone you love, because your words might be the very spark another soul is waiting for.